Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. JACALYN. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. JACALYN at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, and welcome. Hopefully it's welcome back to USA Global TV and Radio. We are thrilled to have you here. I'm Dr. JACALYN KERBECK. I'm the president, founder, and chief listening officer here at our network. If you're not aware, we have right now 29 live broadcasts each and every week. Our show today is The Art in Creating Mental Health Wealth. And joining me all the way from Africa is my friend and co-host. She's a talking head. She's also an elevated listener and one of our panelists on A Woman's Prerogative. She's all in. It's JENETTA Barry and the Epiphany Process. Welcome.
Hello, everybody, to our viewers and our listeners. Great to be back again. And we've got a really lovely lineup today on USA Global TV. So we're busy ladies. It's my busy day with you.
I know 4 shows today, JENETTA, right?
I know, and it's 4 out of 9, if I remember correctly.
That is correct. We have 9 shows today. So I'm
jogging in place. Doing the cabaret.
We have to keep our energy levels up, but you've been doing great work off the platform as well, and I know you have a big event that's coming up, and our guest is backstage, so I look forward to bringing her out. But for people joining us for the first time, tell us a little bit about your event that's coming up and what's the backstory behind it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. JACALYN. Well, the event in a couple of weeks' time is attached to a charity known as World Jenny's Day. And World Jenny's Day is under the arm of my process known as the Epiphany Process. And the backstory, in a nutshell, is I lost my 16-year-old daughter, Jenny, to suicide after she and I had an argument. And having gone through the deep, dark night of the soul, for a long time after she died, I eventually decided I'd find ways and means, study, research to live a life that wasn't like living a life of hell on earth, because that's really what it felt like. And the Epiphany Process, which I created and fine-honed and expanded, got me through and has got many people through all over the world, from day-to-day challenges, people dealing with day-to-day challenges with their relationships, right through to people in trauma. I even assisted terrorist attack victims in Kenya at the Westgate Mall terrorist attack. It's been a phenomenal journey. But World Jenny's Day was born after we realized that Jenny had died on World Mental Health Day on the 10th of October. So every 10th of October, we have World Jenny's Day. And we use theater and the arts to soften and normalize conversations around feeling compromised, feeling depressed, feeling suicidal, and even those solutions get softened using theatre and the arts. And it's going to be just the same this 10th of October. But before that, we've got a fundraiser here in Kenya. And we're starting at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro, and some of us, not me, note, are going to be cycling and others are going to be partially cycling. In fact, we've got a paraplegic man from Spain coming through and he's doing part of the cycle. Others are doing 20 kilometers a day instead of 100, and then others are doing the full cycle. I'm sitting in a car following everybody. And so we're cycling through Savo West and into Savo East and through to the north coast of Mombasa to Watamu. And that will be 6 days and nights in different lodges and camps. And it's just the most precious way to experience wildlife in Kenya. We've got a very, very experienced guide and backup vehicles and everything, and it's been done before, so we're not inventing the wheel for you. It's been done safely before, and people can't stop raving about it once they've done it. So if you'd like to know more, go to worldjenniesday.com and you'll hear all about it on there, from people's testimonials to even the itinerary. Go and have a look there. So that's what's happening in 2 weeks from now.
Super exciting. Yeah. And we're going to have some coverage from you live, right?
We're looking to, yes. In fact, Chris Froome, you know, the British cyclist, Tour de France, he actually went to school with my son Neil, who's going to be on my next program. In fact, he and Neil used to cycle together a lot. They were big chummies. And Chris Froome's nephew is going to be doing some of that coverage, and we'll see what we can do. It'll be amazing if we can do that.
Very exciting.
So yeah, there we go.
Wonderful. And you know, JENETTA, I was going to say, for any event, any experience in life, we all love a great story. And some people are exceptional in delivering great stories. And we remember the master storytellers. And we have one with us today. Tell us about Mara the Storyteller.
Oh my gosh, Mara Menzies, I came across, this is a real Africa Day actually, because Mara is also from Kenya, and I came across her in Clubhouse again, amazing network place. And I was very impressed with the way Mara presented herself. She calls herself Mara the Storyteller. And right now she is performing off West End in the Lyceum Theatre. In fact, Dr. JACALYN, my mother's performed in the Lyceum Theatre. So when I saw that, I was going, oh, this is amazing that we've got Mara today. And it's just such a special connection. And she's performing there right now from the 11th to the 28th of August. Her presentation is called Blood and Gold, and it's about a dying mother who gives her daughter a box containing 3 clues to a priceless treasure, and then that sets into motion a journey filled with humor and tragedy. And she is amazing in the way she tells her stories. So to give you a little bit of background on Mara is actually an award-winning performance storyteller, and she's dynamic and has a colorful style which brings this ancient art form to life. I mean, the ancients and the elders in tribes are amazing at doing this, and she's taking this forward and making sure it doesn't die. She's been invited to share stories in 27 countries with her latest production, Blood and Gold. And it explores the legacy of colonialism and slavery through myth, legend, and fantasy. And it premiered at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019, just before COVID, poor girl. But she got it in before COVID. And as part of the Made in Scotland showcase, because Mara is partially Kenyan and partially Scottish, she was nominated for the Cats Award 2020 and was one of 5 shows nominated for the Philippa Braganca, I hope I pronounced that correctly, award for the Best Emerging Solo Female Performer at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival 2019. And she received rave reviews from top theatre critics. So I'm going to leave it at that, because the rest can be left to the person who can tell that story so very ably. So I would like to introduce you to Mara Menzies. Mara, welcome today.
Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm here in Edinburgh.
I am in awe of all that you've accomplished, and all based around the foundation, the core of being a great storyteller, which is something that is so important to all of us. So tell us, when did you realize you had this gift? Are you able to hear us?
So I have been telling stories for as long as I can remember, and I grew up in Kenya, and we lived in we yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, so I grew up in Kenya in quite a rural part, and so we did not have television. We would go to the local hotel on a Wednesday evening for 1 hour. So the rest of the time, we just grew up with people coming over to the house. My mother would tell stories, my grandmother would tell stories. There were just always stories being told around. And so this was a very normal part of growing up. And then at the age of 13, then moved to Scotland, where my father comes from. And Edinburgh is it's arguably the literary capital of the world. So lots of storytellers here, and both of my dual heritage culture, Kenyan culture, Scottish culture, is very rich oral tradition. And so it was when I was older, and it was when I was expecting my first child, actually, and I wanted this child to really identify with her African heritage. And so the best way for me to do that was through stories. And so I wrote a book because I knew all of these Kenyan stories because I grew up with them. And then I published this book, self-published, and printed 1,000 copies. And then I wanted to sell this book. So when my friends and family had bought them, I still had 900 and something copies of this book. So I would just invite people to come and hear the story, hire halls, community centers, and but I would never read from the book. I would always just tell the story. And it was in that process that, I saw, the kids, because obviously it was a children's book, the kids like it when I do this or when I say this. And then somebody came to one of the storytelling sessions and said, you should visit the Storytelling Center. And I discovered this magical place in the center of Edinburgh, and it's a space that is designed for the human voice. So it's a storytelling center, and I was able to then just witness so many different kinds of storytellers. So, the the performance storytellers, much like me, where we're very physical and theatrical in our delivery, and then others who would just sort of sit there, very quiet, very small, and yet you were gripped to every single word that they said. So you just saw this huge range of diversity in the different kinds of storytelling. And it was then that I just thought, oh my goodness, storytelling is a thing. And that was when I really started on the journey of becoming a storyteller. So starting off with the kinds of stories, how the zebra got its stripes and how the lion got his mane and the giraffe has a long neck, those sorts of stories, to the kind of stories that JENETTA was describing earlier, where you can really use stories to explore very difficult, very taboo subjects. But it's the magic of that is that you're able to then sort of step back and look inwards or downwards onto a particular issue without you necessarily being in it, and having that sort of pressure around you and feeling like you are the center of everything and you have to make a decision. When it's just a story, there's an innocence about it and a separation from it. So you can actually see things from a very, very different perspective. And I think that's how human beings have always been telling their stories. That's part of who we are. We have stories in us that are, thousands of years old. So there's definitely a magic to that story.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I love how you shared you purchased 1,000 copies of the book, and then you had 900 and some left, which is always the case, right? We're first publishing. And yet you took that as an opportunity. You turned it around to a win.
Sorry, that's my dog. He agrees.
The dog's agreeing. Exactly. That's right. The dog has a right to speak.
And I've got Andy going, shh. By the way, Mara, his name is Moto, which Dr. JACALYN in Swahili means hot or fire, but for him it's hot because he's a sausage dog. So he's a hot dog.
Very low to the ground, right?
Yes. Anyway, yes, so now we've been finished being so rudely interrupted. Mara, that transition from telling the stories, hearing the stories being told, and then finding out that your story was interesting, and getting your 1,000 copies, and being at the storytelling center and hearing everybody else's story. How did you take or make the jump from being the person in the street to the one that now is going to professionally present and get to Edinburgh Fringe and now to the Lyceum Theatre? How did you make that transition? Because it must have been quite a thing to do. What did you do and how did you go about it?
Um, it was an interesting journey because I guess for a lot of people, nobody really knows what a storyteller is or what a storyteller does, because I'm certainly not an actress. And I think if you are an actress or a theatre maker, then the journey is much smoother because there is a process, there is a way of doing things. But when you're a storyteller, we don't memorize our stories at all. And actually the difference for me is that when you're a storyteller, the audience is absolutely the most important part of that relationship, of that shared experience. Whereas when you are creating a show and then performing it, then the story is the most important part of that experience, and it doesn't matter so much about the audience, because the audience are simply looking into something that you have created. Whereas with storytelling, it's very much a relationship between you and the audience. But so that journey was about also trying to challenge the misconception that people have of storytelling, which is, oh, it's something that old people do to entertain little children. So you have to sort of challenge that as well. So, and I think it's basically been word of mouth. I think when you express storytelling in a very different way, and I did that deliberately in the clothes that I wear. In my presentation is very dynamic. I engage. I try to remove myself from the sort of the old-fashioned idea of what storytelling is, and also I'm very, I try my hardest to make it. I craft it as much as possible. So taking into account that I don't know who the audience is going to be. The audience could come from so many different diverse social backgrounds. I don't know how they're going to relate to the story, how they're going to engage with the story. So when I'm crafting a story, even though I'm not memorizing it, I know that the story has to speak to as many people as possible, because we're really about planting seeds. We're all at different points on our journey, and in order to get as many people into that story, into that space, then you need to be throwing out an awful lot of different ideas in the hope that one will land, and the hope that one will stick, and the hope that one will grab the attention of somebody in the audience, so that they feel that you are speaking absolutely to them. So even here with the Lyceum, when you're going into a more professional performance space, the technicians are sometimes thrown, because normally there's the QLab software, you're pressing buttons and that operates the light and the sound cues, and you're following the script. So at this word you press the button, the next word you press the button. But with storytelling, the script can actually throw a lot of people, because you often move off script. So you have a vague script, but the technician really needs to know the story, and a lot of it is visual. So when the mother dies, that's when the lights go down, because I might not remember what the words are necessarily. I'm not going to be using the exact same words. And so the technicians, I've had to bring a technician with me sometimes if I am using sound cues and lighting cues, because just to go somewhere and expect a new technician to take on the story is not really workable. But yeah, I think when people really see the response of the audience, because the audience is so invested in the story, they really feel that they are part of it, and sometimes that is missing in a lot of more traditional sort of theatrical spaces, because you're going in, you're watching your show, you clap politely at the end, and then you disappear. But where you are involved in the telling of the story, I'm asking you a question and I expect a response from you, or I ask you to do something and I expect you to do that. And I think as an audience member, somehow inside us, that storytelling thing still exists. So you do find yourself just being drawn into the telling of the story, so that you play an active role in it. You're not just a passive audience member. So I think that transition has taken a long time to come along, but also because you have to push yourself out there. You go to the festivals, and I try to maneuver myself into spaces that perhaps storytellers don't really find themselves normally. So working with like the NHS, for example, or working with I suppose what people might consider more less artistic organizations and more proper organizations, where they can see actually the role of storytelling in terms of uniting people to achieve a common goal, or working with NGOs because they use storytelling to challenge traditions, or negative traditions or harmful traditions, using storytelling in different ways. People can really see the benefits of it. And so I think that whole transition, there are a few storytellers who are now sort of breaking into that mold, into that more professional space, and I think that's a really good thing, because I think the more the idea of storytelling is widened and it becomes more mainstream, then I think we go back to something that is such a fundamental part of who we are as humans, and that can only be beneficial, because that's how we communicate.
That's amazing. So what I'm hearing is that you've been pioneering this, really. And what I'm also hearing, and tell me if I've got it right, that when you get on that stage as a pioneer, you have to use a lot of intuition as to what your audiences. I always say when I present in front of an audience, each audience has its own complete character. And then the next night, the audience character is very, very different. It's like a group consciousness in that theater. And it sounds to me as though you shift the way you tell the story depending on what your audience is or isn't. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think, because the audience is the most important thing, you get a sense of them. And I guess with experience, you get a sense of them quite quickly. So what is the energy in the room? And, if the energy is already quite high, then you take it and you run with it. And, and the audience will let you know very quickly how much they want to be engaged. If the energy is quite low and you go in and you're expecting everybody to come on, get up and let's dance, everyone, then chances are it's not going to work as well. And you might need to work on them a little bit slowly, just introduce more gentle ways of interaction, and then get them to the point where they'll do anything that you want, I suppose. Whereas sometimes you go in and they're just ready for you automatically anyway. Sometimes it can be quite interesting when you've got different ages in the audience, because you need to tell the story in a way that's going to appeal to a 5-year-old, as well as a 20-year-old, as well as a 50-year-old, different kinds of the different social backgrounds, different class backgrounds, all of these things, and you have to make sure that everybody feels that they are part of the story. So it is quite instinctive, and you have to be quite careful in terms of how you're telling the story, because the types of language that you use, sometimes you'll find yourself in an audience where maybe not everybody has English as the first language, for example, and therefore you have to use language that you imagine that most people would be quite familiar with, so simplify it so the story is understandable for everybody. Or sometimes you might find yourself, I've worked with different universities, or like in a certain academic group of people, and I will make sure that I am using words that I will study the words, even if I'm not particularly familiar with that particular group, but I will find words that I know are very relatable to them. There's a newspaper that we read that here in the UK is the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail it's one of the tabloids, so it's it likes to be quite controversial. Not everybody is on the same page, and I read the Daily Mail, but I would say that I am not a Daily Mail reader. But for me, it's important to have an understanding of how other people are thinking and what kind of information they are consuming, and how that can influence the way that I tell the story. Because if I am keeping people away or shutting out different forms of thinking, then I'm not going to be able to reach them when I'm telling a story. And when I'm crafting a story, particular one like Blood and Gold, which is it's looking at really difficult topics. It's looking at the legacy of colonialism. Slavery is not something that people are comfortable discussing. And so if you're trying to find a different way to approach that and open up discussion and debate, then you need to be able to speak everybody's language. And sometimes that means, entering into different spaces, different worlds where you can absorb the energy of that particular audience and then be able to deliver it. So I've got a lovely example of that is when I went to Nigeria for a festival. I'm not Nigerian, but I was telling a Nigerian story, and I know that they have the Jollof Wars, and the Jollof Wars are basically jollof rice. It's a West African rice dish that many of you might be familiar with. But the Ghanaians think that their jollof rice is better. The Nigerians think that theirs is the best. Gambia thinks that theirs is the best. Senegal says our jollof rice is the best. So I used that in the story, and I created this woman was preparing a meal, the finest jollof rice, but none of that Ghanaian nonsense, because I know the conflict between Nigeria and Ghana, and of course they loved it. And they were going a little bit crazy. So it's trying to find the different things that you think are going to engage the audience. So there is, research that happens beforehand to make sure that when you enter into a space, you have your weapons and you have your skills and everything is ripe and ready. And then when you meet them, boom, you hit them with a whole load of different things, and that is when the magic happens.
Wow, huge respect.
Absolutely.
What an art.
It is definitely an art. I have a question for you as something I was told when I was in my corporate career. I always like to tell a story, and I worked with people who are younger than I am, a different generation. And I was given some feedback by people who were in positions above me that it's not always best to tell a long story. I was told, when I was getting my education, use big words, give the details, draw people in. And I was told by these other people, just get to the point, make the story shorter and more relevant to my generation. So it's difficult when you don't know who your audience is. You have different cultures, different generations. What approach do you take?
It's a good question. Every approach is going to be different for me. I find that. I think when I've got something like Blood and Gold, it's an hour-long show, but I also agree that sometimes it can be really difficult to hold people's attention for that whole hour. So even when I was crafting it, I decided that I would break it up into chunks, because then that way also I knew that the individual stories. So just to give you some context, in the show, there's as JENETTA said, the mother puts stories into this box so that the daughter will be able to access these stories once she has gone. And so as the stories fly out of the box, they are kind of small, like shorter, like 10-15 minute stories, as opposed to a whole hour long story, which means then people can focus and get a complete story, and then they can breathe and exhale, and then they kind of go to the next story. Because I figured that if I tour the show, then people will respond to the stories in different ways, because each particular story that flies out of this box, even though the whole thing is part of this bigger story, they are easier to digest. They're kind of small, sort of bite-sized stories that then feed into something else. And I feel that, in my storytelling experience, there are some phenomenal storytellers. There's one woman who comes from the Jewish tradition, Shona Lee Cumbers is her name, and she's a Drixler, which is I think a very rare form of storyteller. I think she might be the last one actually in her tradition, but she has these cycles of stories where there's stories within stories within stories, and the audience then chooses whether they actually want to listen to the next story. So you might be moving through a forest and you meet a man with half a face, but that's a story for another time. But if the audience wants to hear that story of the man with half a face, then they request that story, and then she would then tell the story of the man with half a face. And within that story, there might be another one where they move to a waterfall, and behind the waterfall there was a door, but that's a story for another time. unless the audience wants to hear it, and then you have to work your way back. So I think a lot of these epics, the medieval stories, these huge stories, they're actually just stories within stories within stories. Even actually our own stories, we might say, Mara, the story of Mara's life actually doesn't start with the birth of Mara. It starts with my mother's story and my father's story and the stories of the people who were on before them. And Mara's story does not end when I pass on. The Mara story continues with my children, or whatever happens after that. So there is a whole load of different ways that we can approach storytelling. But I feel it is important to just kind of find ways that you think an audience is going to be able to chew up your stories and enjoy them in different ways. And some stories are far more effective when they are very small, very, very short stories. I find it easier to watch a film, for example, and consume stories in that dedicated space. I give myself 2 hours, I enjoy the story, and then I go. I'm actually very bad with watching television series where you have to clock in order to get the next bit, the next episode, and the next bit. I find it quite hard to do that. So my consumption of those kinds of stories is certainly films as opposed to television, because I just don't have the time or the headspace to continuously engage with a very, very long story. And I think my approach is the same, probably, is finding the bite-sized ones, but I also make those bite-sized ones, I fuse them in so that they do become part and parcel of something bigger.
Great answer. Thank you so much. I found myself being drawn in. I want to hear the story about the man with half a face. But that's for another time, I guess.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how much have you toured this in Kenya, and where is it different in doing it in Kenya as against, say, the Lyceum or in Edinburgh? What's been happening on the Kenya side?
So just, I kind of cut for a second there. So is it just, have I toured it in Kenya? Was that the question?
Yes, that was the question. Have you toured this particular show in Kenya?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I've done snippets of the show in Kenya, performed it in Nairobi, but I think after this Edinburgh Fringe, I will be back. I will be back in Kenya in September, and I will be taking the show. I'll be performing it at the coast in Kilifi and in Mombasa, and I will also be performing it in Nairobi. And even there, I think, even though I've created it very much with Scotland in mind, and Scotland's role in colonialism and slavery, and some of the stories and experiences that I've had here, I will tweak it and turn it into something that is it's a different audience, and so therefore I have to kind of be cognizant of that. But yes, I will be performing it there. But I think the lovely thing about myth and legend is that even though I'm looking at very issues that affect us as human beings today, there's still an otherworldliness about them, because ultimately the themes are the same. We're looking at greed, we're looking at power, we're looking at structures of authority, we're looking at all of those sorts of things. And so it doesn't actually matter when, where, or where the story is told. It's more about the little details. If I talk about the cobblestones and the tiny little closes, that's very specific to Edinburgh, because that is the architecture of this city. So perhaps when I go to Kenya, then I kind of remove them in some way, and I replace it with something that people will identify or relate to more. And then that's the magic of it. But I also know that because it is about colonialism and slavery, I mean, Kenya is a colonized country, and there is a certain way of being with that. a lot of the laws of Kenya are still laws that were created during the colonial period, and a lot of those laws are not particularly useful or beneficial to the actual indigenous people of Kenya. So, and these might be the land laws or wildlife laws. You know, people traditionally have always existed alongside the wildlife, and yet the conservation laws separate people from the wildlife, and the people were traditionally the guardians of these places, and so to separate them kind of is there needs to be some rethinking about how that works, because currently it's not working in people's favor. There's a lot of talk about human wildlife conflict, for example, and that's just one example of how Kenya as a colonized country has been impacted by whatever took place, in the last few decades, in the last few centuries. So yeah, we'll be taking it to Kenya, touring it. But I also find that whenever I go to different places, people are people and audiences are audiences, and everybody loves a good story. I've taken stories to Singapore, and I remember once it was a school that came in to see a story, and they're very, very formal, and there's a certain way of behaving. And so when it was for children, and so when they came in, the teacher asked them to sit on their hands. I thought, my God, sit on their hands? I don't want an audience who's sitting on their hands, because how are they going to be able to engage with me? So as soon as the teacher had sat down and the show opened, then we immediately got rid of the sitting on the hands, because I need the audience to engage with me. I want them to be pulling clouds down from the sky and, waving their arms up as trees or doing whatever it is that I need them to do. So culturally, people will approach things in a more formal way. Other times, sometimes you might find people are talking, and for some storytellers that can be quite distracting, because the attention needs to be on the storyteller. But actually, sometimes you find what's happening is that traditionally, as the story is being told, while people are listening to it, at the same time they say, did you hear what she said in that story? Or, oh, I wouldn't have told it like that, I would have told it slightly differently. So actually, even though there might be a chattering taking place, it's not a chattering that signifies that people are bored. It actually can be a chattering that signifies they're completely engrossed in the story, and they're moving alongside it as well. So yeah, culturally, the storytelling changes, but the beauty about being a storyteller is that you have to be really quite flexible and adaptable to that, and take each situation as it comes, and that's the magic. That is absolutely where the magic is that people then are part of this. It's a very individual experience, because you are listening and sharing in a story, but at the same time it's part of this shared experience as well. So in 10 years, you might be talking about, oh, do you remember that story when the storyteller told this, and your friends say, no, that's not at all the story that they told. So even despite being in the same room and experiencing the same thing, actually the interpretation of that might be something completely different. So yeah, and I find that wherever I go in the world. So it's quite exciting, and I'm looking forward to going back to Kenya and also telling some Kenyan stories, because a lot of Kenyan stories are not being told. And here in Scotland, we've got the advantage of having quite a strong literary culture. In Kenya, in fact, pretty much across the entire African continent, the literary tradition is not as strong as it should be or as it could be. Things are changing, but we're not quite there yet.
Wow, I look forward to seeing it when it comes through. It'll be really interesting. And in fact, I wanted to chat to you some more about those Kenyan laws and what World Jenny's Day is doing, and perhaps doing a storytelling around that too. Because as you know, Mara, and I don't know if you know, Dr. JACALYN, that one of the laws that's come through from the British side is that it's a crime to try and commit suicide, and you can be imprisoned if you don't succeed and you survive. And it used to be a law in the UK as well. And then they said that's archaic and scrubbed it off as an English or UK British law, but it's still sitting in Kenya as a law, and it puts a lot of pressure on people. So that storytelling there would be amazing.
I think the storytelling in Kenya also, just as you're saying, you know, like storytelling is such, it can have such a profound impact on people's mental health, because people are struggling with things on a daily basis, and people don't even realize how much they are impacted by what is taking place around them. So if you're, whether it's issues of identity or belonging or rootlessness, and I think sometimes that is also that is the problem. If people feel that they are alone, if people feel that they're not part of something bigger, they don't know where to go, they don't know where to turn, then, you know, stories can actually help provide tools for, like, actually, you know, this is an experience that is felt by so many other people. And in Kenya, you know, people just even speaking to somebody else is not considered okay. When it comes to particularly the men are not allowed to cry, they're not allowed to show their emotion. I spoke to somebody who said that people go to church on a Sunday, and that's the only time in their lives that they're actually able to openly express themselves. So you might see a man crying in church. It might not be anything to do with religion or being touched by some spiritual entity, but mainly because that's the one time that they're able to express themselves. And storytelling can really help in that process of actually finding a space where you can be. But yeah, I would really be interested in speaking more about that with you as well, JENETTA, about, you know, World Mental Health Day, about how storytelling can impact people's mental health in a different way, hopefully in a more positive way, and also just being able to tell our own stories. You know, if we harbor everything inside us and we're never able to express or share, it's problematic. And I think providing platforms to enable people to do that is a hugely important thing.
It's
Absolutely. Yeah. Make it happen for sure. I just wanted to mention, in addition to the incredible work you do as a storyteller, it also sounds to me like you are a researcher. You have to do a lot of research and really keep yourself abreast of what's going on, what happened in the past, what's going on today. How do you manage your time between the preparation and then the actual delivery of the story?
The research is huge, and I always find it quite funny when it says, "Tell us a story, tell us a story." But I think people don't realize actually how much work goes into creating it. So with Blood and Gold, for example, it was weeks and weeks and maybe a few months of work. And it's important to do that because it depends on the story as well. If you're dealing with real things, if you're dealing with fact, I told a story about David Livingstone once, for example, and I knew that I had to make sure, even though it was a fictional account, it was told from the perspective of Susi and Chuma, who were his African servants. I told it from their perspective, but I needed to make sure that things stood up, because I know there's someone out there who knows a lot more about David Livingstone than me, and if I get something wrong, it's not going to ring true, and then it will reflect poorly on me. And because if you can enter into a story and you can hold the audience in this suspended belief sort of thing, then that's how you can begin to make changes. But if the audience member comes saying, nah, I don't believe that at all, then that's where your error has been made. And the thing is that you can tell a story about being swallowed by an elephant and people will still utterly feel themselves in that world, because you're describing, you know, the slipping down the throat and the dark and the dank and the moisture and the fear that somebody felt. So you can make people believe that they are in another world. But then if you throw something else in that kind of knocks them out of that dreamlike state, then you've lost them, and then they think, well, wait a minute, actually that's not possible, that can't happen. And it's not about the fictitious state that you're in, it's about that fictitious state has to be absolutely fictitious, it has to be absolute in its presentation, because if you have something that just doesn't feel right, then it kind of knocks everything else out of space. So the research is hugely important, and then also it's about what is your intention of telling it, and understanding that what you might intend, whatever message it is that you want to deliver, that's not going to necessarily be the message that falls on the audience's ears, because I might have my intention is I want to explore issues of colonialism and slavery, but I had one audience member, and she had lost her mother of cancer the year before, so as soon as the mother died, that was it, that was all the story was about. And she could see the mother and her relationship with her mother other in different parts of the story. So so if that was what she took from it, then absolutely that's her story. But for somebody else it might be completely different. The three different stories that come flying out of the box, they land on people very differently. One of them is about, it's a racist murder that happens here in Scotland. Scotland doesn't suffer from racism apparently, but we do. But it's, a story like that affected somebody else. There's a second story that was based loosely on a Nigerian folktale, but that was more exploring, a shadow who comes and steals this woman from the human world and takes her back to the world of darkness. And a lot of people, that resonated with them because of this, they were being taken from their land. So whether that was a refugee, whether that was an asylum seeker, whether that was somebody who, like an African American who had that experience of being removed from their world, forcibly taken to live in another place, and then being unable to get back to their homeland because they've been away for so long. So it's issues of home and belonging, and who am I, and where is home for me. So stories will land very, very differently in different people's ears, and it's about sort of taking that understanding, and when you're doing your research and you're crafting the story, very, very much being aware of that very, very much.
Thank you for sharing that and letting our audience know that there is so much work that you put into it. It's not just your passion, your craft, but you actually have to take the time, because people could call you out on it and say, hey, that's not right. I was there, or I knew someone who was there. So bravo, you're doing a fabulous job.
Yeah, Mara, as we come to the end of this show today, for me, I think you've inspired a lot of people who might be in their male logic brain to listen differently, because we're very much about listening differently on this station. And also perhaps even inspired some children to start wanting to do more and follow your footsteps. And I think you're an amazing role model, and we can't wait to have more of you around, and especially for us to talk more about World Jenny's Day, because I think your influence and your impact is profound. So thank you for coming today.
Oh, thank you for having me, and I look forward to chatting more and also sharing some stories with you as well.
I look forward to that as well. Would you please let our audience know, we have your banner up, but for people who can't read the banner or they're on the radio, what's the best way to reach out to you, and who would you like to contact you?
So the best way, I've got my website, which is marathestoryteller.com, but I also get messages on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. The hashtag is @marastoryteller, and I tend to update what I'm doing there as well. So there's information floating around. On Facebook, it's Mara the Storyteller. But yes, I'm generally quite easy to find, and it's really lovely to hear people when they come and they tell me their stories and they say, oh, this inspired me, or that inspired me. I can share. Do I have time for a little 1-minute story, perhaps? I think I will. I'll tell you a little story anyway. This is from Sierra Leone, from a friend of mine, Usifu Jallo, the Cowfoot Prince, and he told a story that I feel kind of sums up what storytelling can do and what stories can do. There were two friends, Frog and Rabbit, and they were walking through a forest and they were so engrossed in each other's conversation that they did not see a big hole at the side of the road. And Frog, he fell in, and he hopped and he hopped and he hopped and he hopped, but he couldn't get out. So his friend Rabbit went to get help, and he arrived a little while later dragging a huge ladder behind him when he saw Frog sitting on the road, and he said, hey, what's going on? And Frog said, when you left, a snake fell into that hole. I had to get out. So that's the story, but it made me think about how, when we're in a difficult situation, we keep doing the same thing. We hop, but nothing is going to change. We have to start doing things differently. And when a bigger problem comes, if we haven't figured out how to look for the footholds, how to search for the vines, how to figure out another way of getting out of that hole, then all hope is lost. But stories are the things that actually give us those tools to help dig ourselves or pull ourselves out of difficult situations. So there's a tiny little story to finish the session on.
I love it. That's so true. How many times do we hear someone else's story and it gives us inspiration or hope, or maybe it causes us to take a step back and rethink what we're doing? So being a great storyteller, an expert storyteller, is in so much need across this world. So thank you for everything that you're doing in telling the stories and taking the message across the universe. It's fabulous. And we'll look forward to having you back again on this show or any other show that we have here. We've got 29 shows as of today. And so we'll look forward to speaking with you about World Jenny's Day. I'm excited about that too.
Thank you, Mara. We'll see you again soon.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Thank you again. Take care of yourself. Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, I have to say, the fact that you were over on Clubhouse, I know you shared your feelings about it. You met some amazing people. I mean, she's incredible. And had you not been there, maybe not, you wouldn't have met her. We wouldn't have just had this wonderful opportunity. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where Clubhouse has been a big mishmash for me. It taught me to go, okay, I may not want to step out in that forum with my work, but it gave me an opportunity to listen to hundreds of other people and their work. And it created a huge networking ability that was more heartfelt than a WhatsApp group that's networking, because you really get to know the people and you get to know their voices and you get to know their sincerity. So as much as I didn't enjoy doing my work on there, I really enjoyed listening to other people's, and Mara's a prime example of that.
Thank you so much, JENETTA. I couldn't agree with you more. Would you please share your information? How can people reach out to you and who should contact you? And we're excited for people to join for World Jenny's Day. What do they have to do to get involved?
Thank you. Yes. Well, anybody who'd like to either be part of it behind the scenes, we are looking for moderators on the day. We're doing theatre and the arts, so we'll have performers of all types and variations performing throughout the 17 hours. We're starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, UK time, and we're finishing at 10 o'clock in the evening on Eastern time, EDT. And that's because it's on the 10th of the 10th. So we've got 10, 10, 10, 10 happening on that day. And if you would like to be behind the scenes and help, we would love to have your expertise and your guidance where it's needed, your support. That would be wonderful. If you are a performer of any type, so you could be a singer, part of a band, a choir, a comedian, a ventriloquist, whatever it is, even a mime, come forward. We've got on the worldjennysday.com website, if you go to the 2022 lineup, there is a form for you to apply or to just get in contact with us so that we can chat with you and see what it is that you best would like to do. And what we're looking at is going around the world, because this year it's called Where in the World is World Jenny's Day? And so we'll have people performing from Australia. In fact, I've just been talking to one of Jenny's school friends from here in Kenya. They went to the Banda school together, and she's now been living for the last 13 years in Australia, in Melbourne, and she's become a phenomenal singer. So we've got Australia on the move now with Anita, and what an amazing connection that she was Jenny's friend. So we've got Australia coming in. We've got New Zealand. We're busy putting that together. But we would like to get representation from as many countries around the world and move around the world in those 17 hours. And of course, Kenya is on that list without a doubt. It has to be there, and any other country in Africa that would like to step forward, we would love to have you there. So let's see where this takes us, because it's a piece of art in the making. I see it as a piece of sculpture, the day, or liken it to a piece of sculpture. See how, as we put it together, what it forms. And I think that was the success of World Jenny's Day on Clubhouse last year, where we did it over 24 hours. So that we went through with different moderators throughout the day, and people stepped forward, and it's still talked about to, nearly a year later. So please do come forward, fill in that form, introduce yourself, and we look forward to having a conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Janetta. I appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of hours for a global event.
With Neil, my son. Yes, that'll be wonderful.
Yes. Super
It's
excited.
our first episode. We're introducing a new program, and that's always got such a special energy to it. So I'm looking forward to it as well. There's an airplane taking off.
That's an adventure in and of itself. So, but so for now, Jeanette and I are signing off, and I will be back shortly with the United Kingdom news and culture and our expert correspondents. And we'll see you back here then. Please go over to our YouTube channel, which is USA Global TV and Radio, and hit subscribe. We really appreciate it. And our newsletter is coming out at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So if you're not on the newsletter list and you'd like to be, please go over to usaglobaltv.com and you can subscribe as soon as you get there. All right, that's all for now. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.